Mr. Speaker.
Present us, O Lord, in all our doings with thy most gracious favor, and further us with thy continued help, that on all our works begun, continued, and ended in thee, we may glorify thy holy name, and finally by thy mercy attain everlasting life. Amen. I would like to table a report from the Advocate for Children and Youth, pursuant to Section 14.2, and in accordance with Section 28 of the Advocate for Children and Youth Act. The Advocate has submitted a special report entitled, In Their Sufficient Interests. Introduction of guests. I'll go first, please. In the Speaker's Gallery, there are 16 grade 12 students. Wave, please. And they're from Hague High School, and they're accompanied by their teacher, Jaron Vetter, and parent chaperone, Tanner Tyndall. Please welcome the Hague students and their the chaperones and the teacher to their Legislative Assembly. I recognize the Minister of Rural and Remote Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I see seated in your gallery are a number of guests who will join us here once again today from the Students for Harm Reduction and Informed Policy Group. We'll be having a meeting here a little bit later this afternoon to talk about the work that this government does and the advocacy that these students do as well. I see Regina President Ryan Krochak is up there, as well as a number of other students who have joined us here today, and I would just ask that all members join me in welcoming these individuals to their Legislative Assembly this afternoon.
Recognize a member from Saskatoon Fairview.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'll join with the minister opposite in welcoming this group to their Legislative Assembly here today. We have Ryan Krochak. He's a second year and Shrip Regina President, Aaron White, Year 2 and the Saskatoon President, Adrian Tier, Year 3 and the founding member, Michaela Rudnitsky, Year 1, VP Community Engagement for Regina, Anthony Cans, Year 3, a founding member, Sarah Valentine, Year 3, also a founding member, Cheyenne Shirazi, Year 4, former president for SMSS and also a general member, and Kayla Cropper, Year 2, College of Medicine, making the Links representative. Joined with these students today, we also have representatives from community-based organizations who are serving the province in terms of harm reduction. From the Neo-Utina Friendship Center, we have Teresa Innes, the Executive Director, and Emil Garapi, the Harm Reduction Coordinator. And then also joining us from Prairie Harm Reduction in Saskatoon, the Executive Director, Kayla DeMong. I want to ask all members to join me in welcoming this group to their assembly today and thank them for the work they do on a daily basis.
Recognize a member from Cypress Hills.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the West Gallery, I'd like to welcome two grades from the Cypress Hills area from the community of East End, grade 11 and 12, and their chaperones, Mary Hansen and Jordan DeGal. Give us a big wave. These individuals are from the home of Scotty, the East End areas where the school's at. So welcome to your legislature, and I hope you enjoy your day. Thank you.
Recognize a member from Yorkton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ask Lee for an extended introduction.
Leave has been requested. Is leave granted? Carried.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's indeed an honor to introduce this group of guests today in your gallery. Two very old friends of mine now from Ottawa is Jerry Sherman and his wife Carol. They run a group called Embassy Connections Canada out of Ottawa, and they've been doing this for well over 25 years. They've hosted ambassadors to 7 different provinces of over 104 countries over those 25 years, Mr. Speaker. They regularly they build relationships with these world leaders and bring them around Canada to show them different parts of Canada. And quite often, Jerry will bring them out west to experience our culture and our ways out in the west in Canada, Mr. Speaker. With Jerry today is the ambassador for the Embassy of Lebanon in Canada, Ambassador Fadi Zaidi, and also Embassy of Ecuador in Canada, Ambassador Carlos Itiva. Mr. Speaker, and also with the group today is someone that's no stranger to this House, in here pretty much every single day watching over us, is Chaplain of the Legislative Assembly, Pastor Fred Hill. So I ask all members to welcome these individuals to their Legislative Assembly.
Recognize Minister of Highways.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to introduce 2 members of our Saskatchewan road building community to their legislature today. We have Rob Myers from Lonesome Prairie Sand and Gravel, Harley Diedrichs from Potsis Construction. It's great to have you guys today. We have a number of our road builders here visiting the legislature, and we'll have an opportunity to visit with them here later today. Harley serves as board chair for Sask Heavy Construction Association. And just a quick story, I was out on a highway project this summer, and I noticed something that wasn't quite right. And I reached out to Harley right away, and Harley went to site right away, looked at it, and right away got to work with our ministry in terms of fixing the issue. That's the quality of road builders that we have in this province. So I'd like to welcome both Harley and Rob to their legislature here today.
I'd just like to caution our guests, just want to welcome everyone here, but please do not participate in any of the debate, and that includes clapping or any talking or use of your iPhones. Thank you. I recognize the member from Regina Rosemont.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to join with the Highways Minister to welcome Rob and Harley to their assembly and for their leadership for this very important sector in our province, their representation and leadership for the Saskatchewan Heavy Construction Association, and for all of their efforts to rebuild and to build and ensure safe highways across this province, which are so vital. We look forward to joining them and their members here later today, and we're just very thankful for their leadership, their service, and their presence here in the Assembly today.
Recognize the member from Osmond Touchwood.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To you and through you, I would like to introduce Rob Perrin, situated in your gallery. Just give a wave there, Rob. Rob is the Relationship Manager for Commercial Financial Services at the Royal Bank of Canada. Like so many in my generation, Rob left Saskatchewan in the early 90s for Alberta, and he came back in 2008, and we are so happy to have him. He was a friend of our late colleague Derek Myers, and he wanted to come in and sign the Book of Condolences, so I encouraged him to stay and enjoy question period today. So to you and through you, please join me in welcoming Rob Perrin to his Legislative Assembly.
Here, here. Recognize a member from Regina Elphinstone Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just wanted to join in the introductions and welcome Dylan Moran, self-advocate, who is no stranger to this place, who's seated in the West Gallery. Mr. Speaker, I've taken my feet, as have several other members in this House, and welcomed Dylan. He's a frequent spectator here. But I did want to just take a moment. The last time I ran into Dylan, I said, Dylan, you do such good work. And he said, well, you know, I'm starting to feel like a bit of a broken record, and he just seemed a bit discouraged. And then 2 days later, he was on the front page of the Leader Post, advocating for free transportation for kids under 18. So I just want to say to Dylan that what he does is important. It takes courage and conviction to speak out on these issues time and time again. Change will come, and we'll look back and we'll say, that Dylan, he was one of the ones. He was there the whole time, and we'll be able to shake his hand and thank him for all that he's done for the people of Saskatchewan. So with that, I want to welcome Dylan to his Legislative Assembly.
Recognize the Minister of Advanced Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, to you and through you to all members of the legislature, I'd like to introduce two people sitting in the West Gallery. Mr. Speaker, today with us Parm Raywal, Director of Western Canada Government Relations for the Canadian Bankers Association, is with us, and Nick Colosimo, Director of Ontario Government Relations for the Canadian Bankers Association. We know how we all love bankers, so we're happy to have them here in the legislature today. Mr. Speaker, they're here to meet with the Minister of Justice and the Attorney General a little bit later on to talk about a number of issues that are important to the CBA. Mr. Speaker, the last time Nick was here, he was representing Advocates, whose membership consists of financial advisors. That was part of the government's work on the Financial Planners and Financial Advisors Act, which is intended to protect consumers by ensuring proper regulation of those in the financial sector. So I wanted to thank Nick personally for the help that he gave us and the work of his industry in helping protect consumer protection in Saskatchewan in respect to that area, Mr. Speaker. So I'd ask all members of the legislature to welcome Parm and Nick to the legislature here in Saskatchewan.
Recognize a member from Regina Rosemont.
Mr. Speaker, it's a pleasure to join with the minister opposite on behalf of the official opposition to welcome Parm and Nick to the Saskatchewan Assembly and to thank them for their leadership. It's a pleasure to have leadership of the Canadian Bankers Association here. I recall Nick as well from his advocacy back in the day with respect to the financial planners, and it's critical that we have well-regulated banking and financial planning industries that have integrity, and I want to thank both Parm and Nick for their part in making sure that's the case and for their presence here today.
Recognize the Justice Minister and Attorney General.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to join with the member opposite and my colleague in welcoming Nick and Parm from the Canadian Bankers Association and look forward to our meeting later on this afternoon.
Presenting petitions. I recognize a member from Saskatoon Centre.
Miigwech, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to present the following petition. The folks who signed this petition wish to bring to your attention. This province has failed to produce a credible plan to reduce emissions. The failure of this government will have devastating impacts on the province's economic productivity, human and environmental health. Parliamentarians have a vital role in tackling climate change, including establishing the necessary legislation and policy frameworks to transition social, economic and land-based practices to avoid climate catastrophe. I'll read the prayer. We in the prayer that reads as follows, respectfully request that the Legislative Assembly of Saskatchewan call on the provincial government to enact a credible climate action plan and allocate appropriate funding to ensure real reductions in Saskatchewan greenhouse gas emissions that are consistent with the scientific consensus to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. The folks who signed this petition reside in Regina. I do so present.
Recognized member from Moose Jaw Wakamo.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Our petition today is we, the undersigned residents of the province of Saskatchewan, wish to bring to your attention the following. The Liberal NDP-supported federal government continues to infringe on the constitutional rights of the province of Saskatchewan and implement policies that are detrimental to our province's economic well-being. The commitments and actions of the federal government have made control of Saskatchewan's resources rights unclear. That an unsupportive federal government will continue to impede Saskatchewan's potential to play a global role in providing resources to the world market. we in the prayer that reads as follows: respectfully request that the Legislative Assembly of Saskatchewan takes the following action: to call upon the Government of Saskatchewan to implement Saskatchewan First policies and legislations that will support the development of Saskatchewan as a global supplier of food, fuel, and fertilizer without federal infringement on Saskatchewan's constitutional authority. The below undersigned are residents of Warman, Saskatchewan. I so present.
Recognize the member from Saskatoon-Meewasin.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I rise again today to present our petition calling on the Government of Saskatchewan to join with other municipalities and provinces around Canada and introduce legislation to prohibit conversion therapy. The undersigned residents would like to bring to the attention the following. Conversion therapy is a discredited and abusive practice which attempts to actively change the sexual orientation, gender identity, or gender expression of a person. The practice of conversion therapy or reparative therapy is seriously harmful to individuals and is opposed by psychological and psychiatric associations across North America and much of the world. Mr. Speaker, I'll read the prayer. We in the prayer that reads as following: respectfully request the Legislative Assembly of Saskatchewan call on the Government of Saskatchewan to ban the practice of conversion therapy and prohibit transporting of youth and adults outside of Saskatchewan for such purposes. Sure. Mr. Speaker, the signatories today reside in Saskatoon and Wynyard. I do so present.
Sure. Recognize a member from Regina, Elphinstone Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm on my feet again to present a petition calling on the Sask Party government to increase SED rates to make sure that SED rates are fair and equitable. The Saskatchewan Assured Income Disability Program is a program for individuals with significant and enduring disabilities with barriers to employment, Mr. Speaker. The program did not see an increase for more than 7 years, which represented a 20% reduction in overall benefits before it saw this $1-a-day announcement with this year's budget, Mr. Speaker. A totally insufficient addition to this program, Mr. Speaker. The other thing that the signatories of this petition are concerned about is this government's discriminatory practice of requiring people on the SED program to apply for early CPP, clawing back those dollars, dollar for dollar, and then leaving people with significant and enduring disabilities with less after they turn 65. These are folks who are already living in deep poverty, Mr. Speaker. So with that, I will read the prayer. We in the prayer that reads as follows respectfully request the Legislative Assembly of Saskatchewan call on the Government of Saskatchewan to increase SED rates, to respect the constitutional rights of persons with disability in Saskatchewan, to index SED rates going forward, and to provide targeted relief to those living in deepest poverty. Mr. Speaker, the signatories of this petition reside in Saskatoon. I do so present. Here.
Reading and receiving petitions, statements by members. I recognize the member from Yorkton.
Mr. Speaker, 57 years. That's how long George Flunder has been volunteering for the Kinsman Club of Yorkton. Mr. Speaker, George was just recently recognized by his fellow club members with the Kin Canada Life Membership Award on March 18th at the Yorkton Kinsman Pierogi Cup Hockey Tournament Cabaret. George has been well known throughout the Yorkton area for his volunteerism and using his guitar slinging skills to entertain the nursing home residents. Among many other ways, he makes our community a much better place. He started his journey with the Kinsmen in 1966. He was living and working in the community of Esterhazy, where he was running a parts department. After making the, I believe, smart decision to move to Yorkton in 1971, George committed to volunteering, and it only increased with local events like the Pierogi Cup and Telemiracle, to name only a few. Mr. Speaker, if I sat here listing all of George's amazing accomplishments, we could be here all day. Rarely is there a Kinsman project that George isn't signed up to participate in. And I know George is far too humble for all of that. So I ask all members of this Assembly to join me in recognizing George Flunder for his over half a century of volunteering and making life better for people of Yorkton and Saskatchewan. Thanks, George. Your work is not unnoticed, and that of the Kinsmen as well. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Recognize the member from Saskatoon Centre.
Miigwech, Mr. Speaker. I rise to recognize and give thanks to a constituent of mine, Jackie Latondres. Jackie Latondres is a well-known and respected member of the arts community in Saskatoon Centre. Mr. Speaker, Jackie founded the Free Flow Dance Theatre Company in 1995. She has been nominated for various awards, including the Saskatchewan YWCA Women of Distinction Award, the Saskatoon Champion for the Arts, the Saskatchewan Lieutenant Governor's Award, and most recently, the Queen Elizabeth II Platinum Jubilee Medal. Jackie is a strong advocate in the arts and dance scene in this province, helping to establish Saskatoon's own International Burlesque Festival. Jackie strives to create bonds and connections between artists that will continue to grow through the years, and works to make dance an art form that is accessible to all. Her dedication to dance is appreciated, valued and respected in Saskatoon Centre and in Saskatchewan. I would like to take this opportunity to say thank you to Jackie Latondres for all the work you have done and continue to do for the arts community in Saskatchewan. Miigwech.
Recognize a member from Westmount Touchwood.
Spring is here, Mr. Speaker. The weather might not be accommodating just yet, but the days in the calendar don't lie. Spring is about renewal, growth, and a continuation of life. Nothing makes people feel better than seeing new baby calves being born, taking their first steps, then running with their tails in the air. Our entire beef industry, contributing millions to our economy, all begins with that little baby calf. Recently, some great news has been announced for the Canadian beef sector, Mr. Speaker. Japan has opened their market fully for Canadian imports for the first time in nearly 2 decades. This is fantastic news for our producers, feeders, and processors, as Japan is Canada's second largest export market for beef. Saskatchewan cattlemen are world-class, and there's optimism throughout the industry. I was able to attend the 25th annual bull sale at Crescent Creek Angus, Mr. Speaker. Wes, Kim, and Wade Olenek are 4th and 5th generation cattle producers in the Goodeve area. Prices were strong, excitement filled the sale barn, and some outstanding genetics changed hands. After spring comes summer, Mr. Speaker, and after last week, I encourage everyone in this chamber to hug their loved ones and load their barbecue up with a great Saskatchewan steak. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Recognize a member from Saskatoon University.
Mr. Speaker, as the critic for human rights and status of women, I had the honour of attending the launch of the report Human Trafficking on the Prairies. This launch was held on January 17th at the University of Saskatchewan's Gordon Oaks Red Bear Student Centre. The aim of this report was to measure the scope, characteristics, and determinants of human trafficking and sexual exploitation across the Canadian prairies, including here in Saskatchewan. In the report, it is noted that human trafficking across the prairies is very much linked to systemic issues such as poverty, discrimination, and colonization. Mr. Speaker, Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit people are especially vulnerable to trafficking due to the legacy of colonialism and ongoing systemic violence and racism against Indigenous peoples. When report researcher Dr. Manuela Valle Castro was asked how the systemic issues identified in the report should best be addressed, she stated that housing first policies, legislation to guarantee safe transport for people traveling from remote areas, and policies to address the over-incarceration of Indigenous women are key. Mr. Speaker, these areas are well within provincial jurisdiction, and so I call on the government, the ministers particularly, to read this report and to then convene with experts across our province to take decisive action around these crucial recommendations. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Recognize a member from Saskatoon Churchill Wildwood.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a great day in Saskatoon Churchill Wildwood. It would be an even better day if 2 high school sports teams could win championship basketball titles. You see, Mr. Speaker, I have 2 high schools in my constituency, Holy Cross and Walter Murray, and both high schools have a very good senior boys basketball team. The top-ranked Holy Cross Crusaders took on the second-seeded Walter Murray Marauders in the Saskatoon City Finals. The game ended with Holy Cross outscoring the Marauders 77-65. 10 of the 11 players on the Crusaders basketball team celebrated the Premier Division City Championship last season as well. In fact, all 4 high schools played for a second straight year in the Saskatoon Basketball City Championships. The St. Joseph Guardian girls were victorious over the Holy Cross Crusaders. Fast forward to Hopla 2023 that took place March 23rd to 25th in Prince Albert. Once again, Holy Cross faced Walter Murray in the 5A Boys High School Provincial Finals. Holy Cross made it a clean sweep, capping their undefeated league season and city championship with a provincial title. Congratulations to all the players and coaches of these basketball teams. We thank the coaches for their time and dedication on behalf of their athletes. I ask all members to join me in congratulating the Holy Cross High School Senior Boys Basketball team for an outstanding season. Thank you.
Recognize a member from Athabasca.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last month, 16 youth from Clearwater River Dene Nation, Buffalo River Dene Nation, and Birch Narrows Dene Nation participated in NextGen's Energy Youth Mentorship Program. NextGen and Vancouver Canucks partnered together to send these youth to the West Coast where they could be part of a special night. The youth got to lace up their skates and hit the ice for some practice before playing a scrimmage with the Canucks. The next day, they were in attendance for the Canucks' 5th annual First Nations celebration game against the Minnesota Wild. Not only did they see the game, they got to sit up in the suite and receive special themed jerseys that the players also wore. And Mr. Speaker, that's not where the surprises ended. The group that got to visit during the game from one of Saskatchewan's best, Ethan Bear. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to read this quote from Adam Engdahl, the Vice President of Communities for NextGen, and I quote, "He came in and sat in the box where the kids were watching the game, and I can tell you right now, if Wayne Gretzky walked into the room, he wouldn't have gotten the response that Ethan Bear did. Some of the kids had tears in their eyes," end quote. Mr. Speaker, hockey is everyone's game. I ask that all members join me in thanking NextGen and the Canucks for the fantastic experience. Thank you to the teams and their staff for being so accommodating and giving these youth from the North the experience of a lifetime. Thank you.
Hear, hear, hear. Recognize a member from Cannington.
Hear, hear. Mr. Speaker, back when they were in government, the NDP said it was statistically impossible and farcical for the Sask Party to say Saskatchewan could grow by 100,000 people in 10 years. And their economic development minister even said it's okay when people leave the province because that leaves more here for the rest of us. Now, that was a long time ago, and Saskatchewan has changed a lot, but the NDP have not changed one bit. The member for Newtana said there's nothing here to be proud of. The member from Regina University called our economy a dumpster fire. And just last week, the member from Meewasin said, we will never reach their goal of 100,000 jobs by 2030. Same old NDP. They were wrong then, and they're wrong now. Now let's snap back to reality. In 2022, 20,000 new full-time jobs were created in this single year alone. Our population grew by over 29,000 people in that same year. And our graduate retention program has allowed more than 81,000 post-secondary graduates to claim tax credits since its inception. And only the opposition would describe that kind of positivity as toxic. But Saskatchewan people see right through it. We'll continue to promote Saskatchewan internationally and create opportunities for people to grow their families and careers. That's growth that works for everyone.
Question period. I recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, this tired and out-of-touch government is failing to deliver on health care. 216 times in the span of just 6 weeks, Saskatchewan people called for an ambulance, but none was available. Mr. Speaker, this is a government that has been in power for 16 years. These failures are their failures. Mr. Speaker, to the Premier, does he think that it's acceptable that 216 times in just 6 weeks Saskatchewan people called for an ambulance and none was available.
Right.
Recognize the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, very proud of the budget that was voted against by the members opposite that was introduced the other day. The increase of almost $9 million to our ambulance system across the province, our ground ambulance system across the province, Mr. Speaker. This builds on 95 FTEs that were added to that ground ambulance system last year, Mr. Speaker. That's added to the significant investments that we have in the STARS Air Ambulance across this province, Mr. Speaker, a service brought in by this government, highly valued by people from corner to corner in this province, and Mr. Speaker, and continued funding for our fixed-wing ambulance service, Mr. Speaker, that reaches those in rural and remote locations, Mr. Speaker. I would say that the president of the paramedic services, the Chiefs of Saskatchewan, had this to say about the budget that was introduced the other day, Mr. Speaker, again, voted off by this government, opposed by the members opposite, and I quote, "It's a great budget for ground EMS in Saskatchewan."
Recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, I'm going to repeat. 216 times in the span of just 6 weeks, people in this province called for an ambulance and none was available. People like Sharon Chartier. Mr. Speaker, it is completely unacceptable. This is a government that's been in power for 16 years. These failures are their failures. The question, how did things get so bad with our ambulance system, and what is that Premier's plan to fix it?
Hear, hear.
Recognize the Premier.
Those conversations have most certainly been happening with our ground ambulance representatives across the province, Mr. Speaker, and I would again point to last year's budget where 95 full-time equivalent positions were added into our ground ambulance crew across this province, Mr. Speaker. That is to provide service for all Saskatchewan residents. In addition to that, in the budget that was just recently voted against by the members opposite, Mr. Speaker, another $8.8 million, Mr. Speaker. Those are dollars that are going towards stabilizing the very service that the question is asking for, Mr. Speaker, and as well as adding support for contracted EMS operators and as well as radio upgrades, Mr. Speaker, as well as equipment upgrades that our EMS providers need in order to continue to do their work and do it appropriately. Mr. Speaker, in addition to those increases to our ground ambulance service, I would once again say that it was this government that brought in STARS Air Ambulance, Mr. Speaker, that adds to the capacity that we have with our fixed-wing fleet, Mr. Speaker, reaching and providing that service to all Saskatchewan residents, wherever you might live.
Recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, from top to bottom, this tired and out-of-touch government is failing to deliver on health care. Right. People in this province can't get a family doctor. They can't get an ambulance because none are available, and our ERs are experiencing what nurses are calling total system collapse. Mr. Speaker, this Sask Party government has been in power for 16 years. These failures are all their failures. Right. When will this Premier finally take some responsibility for the damage that he's done to our healthcare system?
Recognize the Premier.
In addition to that $8.8 million provided this year to our ground ambulance service, which is building on the 95 full-time equivalent folks that are providing that service to Saskatchewan residents, there was almost $100 million, Mr. Speaker, that was provided for the Health Human Resource Plan across the province, Mr. Speaker, and that includes the ability for us to recruit folks into our healthcare centres, including our ambulance, our ground ambulance services, Mr. Speaker, paramedics, advanced care paramedics, Mr. Speaker, and EMTs. It provided money to train those very folks, Mr. Speaker, with 150 nurse training positions and an additional 550 training positions across the health spectrum, Mr. Speaker. It included incentives in those hard-to-recruit positions and locations across the province, Mr. Speaker, and for certainly, Mr. Speaker, builds on the compensation package we have in the province, which in the case of nurses is the second highest compensation rate in the nation of Canada, Mr. Speaker, to retain those folks right here in our province.
Recognize a member from Saskatoon Eastview.
Mr. Speaker, let's take a look at some of those 216 families that this government has failed to deliver ambulance care for. on the east side of the province, included in that FOI, Esterhazy, home to one of the largest industrial sites in the entire province. Esterhazy went without ambulance care 7 times in just 6 weeks. Melville and Langenburg had 3 calls each, no ambulance. And twice in Ituna, there's no ambulance available. Why should people in East Saskatchewan accept this government's record of failure when it comes to making ambulances available and ready to go when people need them?
Hear, hear. Recognize the Minister of Rural and Remote Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And the Premier mentioned earlier some of the significant investments that are being made by this government over the past number of years and continuing in this year's budget when it comes to rural health care. I note that the member referenced the community of Esterhazy, Mr. Speaker, which we are proud to say, as we did in the budget, they will be getting a new integrated facility in the community of Esterhazy to support the expansion of the economy that's happening there and the need to replace the existing long-term care facility and hospital in that community. Mr. Speaker, in last year's budget, we created a rural EMS stabilization strategy, a plan to add 70 more FTEs in rural Saskatchewan to help support and enhance ambulance services in rural communities right across this province. Mr. Speaker, we've brought that program back again in this year's budget with some new dollars for the EMS stabilization and investment, and that includes in that particular area of the province, Mr. Speaker, communities like Kamsack, which we're hopeful will be able to fill those positions, Mr. Speaker, to help enhance the rural ground EMS that we have in rural Saskatchewan. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Recognize the member from Saskatoon Eastview.
I hate to tell the minister, it's not looking very stable out there for rural ambulance care, Mr. Speaker. In Shaunavon, down in the southwest, there were 7 calls for an ambulance that went unanswered because no ambulance was available. That's more than once a week. What does the minister say to people in Shaunavon who are told no ambulance is available on a weekly basis by this tired and out-of-touch government?
Recognize the Minister of Rural and Remote Health.
Mr. Speaker, I would encourage the member opposite to maybe go talk to the people of Shaunavon, maybe talk to the mayor of Shaunavon, Kyle Bennett, and ask him what he thinks about the investments that this government has made into rural health care, Mr. Speaker. And, Mr. Speaker, I would point out to the member opposite that in this year's budget, the expansion of the rural EMS stabilization project actually says yes to Shaunavon. They're one of the communities that will be benefiting from the enhanced investment into rural EMS stabilization, Mr. Speaker. One of 27 more communities that is going to benefit from this particular program. Mr. Speaker, this is a multi-year EMS stabilization project that we have undertaken right across this province to make sure that we're stabilizing and enhancing the health care in rural Saskatchewan, to make sure that we are getting rid of the temporary service disruptions that are out there. As was mentioned earlier by the Premier, that we've had a very good support and a very good working relationship with the paramedic services chiefs of Saskatchewan for the work that's being done by this government in partnership with paramedics right across Saskatchewan.
Recognize a member from Saskatoon Eastview.
Mr. Speaker, this minister should be taking responsibility for the damage that his government is doing to health care in rural communities. We know that retention in health care is important. And it's important, so we discussed it last night in committee. When I asked the minister what his plans were, beyond paying salaries to increase retention for healthcare workers, he shrugged his shoulders and said there were no plans and, quote, well, that's what they're paid to do. Mr. Speaker, we need to retain the healthcare workforce that we still have. When will this tired and out-of-touch minister do what he's paid to do and come up with a plan to retain our healthcare workforce?
Recognize the Minister of Rural and Remote Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, it would be good if the member opposite would actually pay attention to some of the things that are discussed in this Assembly and elsewhere, Mr. Speaker. Since September, we have talked about a new 4-point action plan to recruit, train, and incentivize and retain healthcare workers. Mr. Speaker, launched as a $60 million plan, enhanced in the budget, which again was not supported by the members opposite, $100 million cross-government plan to help with that particular project. Mr. Speaker, recruiting more healthcare workers from international areas, providing incentives from $30,000 to $50,000 for various designations where we have temporary service disruptions, hard to recruit areas when it comes to trying to fill some of those positions. As I've said previously, Mr. Speaker, we're very grateful for the work that is done by our healthcare workers right across this province, in our hospitals, our long-term care facilities, our health centres, rural, urban, northern Saskatchewan, southern Saskatchewan, Mr. Speaker, and we're going to continue to work with those partners to build upon this healthcare system that we are all proud of. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Recognize the member from Saskatoon Eastview.
Mr. Speaker, the minister was very clear last night. He has no plan for retaining the healthcare workers that we still have.
Right.
At committee, we also went over this government's progress on hiring 300 continuing care aides, or rather this government's lack of progress. Not only did we lose CCAs in the last year, it's been 3 years since a big election promise for more continuing care aides, and this government has only hired 17. It's a total failure to deliver. How does this minister justify missing the mark so badly on his keynote election promise?
Hear, hear.
Recognize the Minister of Rural and Remote Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. More negativity, more doom and gloom from the member opposite about how terrible it is out there in rural Saskatchewan, Mr. Speaker. Again, you know, as I said yesterday, they're apparently embarked in some sort of a tour, a solutions tour, and we've yet to hear a single solution from the members opposite on that particular tour, Mr. Speaker. You know, Mr. Speaker, on this, the commitment to add 300 more continuing care aides. The member opposite's right. That is a commitment that we made in the election in 2020, and just for the member opposite's information, in the first year we funded and budgeted for 108 positions, new full-time permanent CCA positions in the first year of that commitment. Those have all been hired, Mr. Speaker. 117 added last year, all but 0.5 of the FTEs have been hired, Mr. Speaker, and the remaining 75 CCAs are funded in this year's budget funding commitment, Mr. Speaker. The members opposite don't seem to understand that these are new positions that did not exist before, that are fully funded, something that did not exist before, which ends up being new positions in the healthcare system. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Recognize the member from Regina Elphinstone Centre.
Mr. Speaker, we've asked the Sask Party government before to end their discriminatory practice of forcing said clients living with significant and enduring disabilities to draw from their Canada pension plans early. I've penned many letters, Mr. Speaker, and raised it in this House many times. This practice reduces the amount of CPP they can claim in the future, costing them thousands of dollars down the road. And now the Regina Anti-Poverty Ministry is actually suing this provincial government. This practice was found to be unconstitutional in Manitoba already. Why won't this Sask Party government just end this practice and stop forcing people with disabilities to draw down their pensions early? Hear, hear.
Recognize the Minister of Social Services.
Speaker, in terms of the government's commitment to income assistance, Mr. Speaker, $620 million this year, increases in 4 of our major programs within this budget. Unfortunately, the members opposite voted against that, Mr. Speaker. Of course, we take a whole-of-income approach when we look at benefits that are available to individuals that need income assistance, Mr. Speaker, and that includes provincial programs that top up other programs that might be with the federal government, or individual funding that that is taken a look at. So, Mr. Speaker, I note we have some of the highest rates of income assistance in the Dominion of Canada, able to do that because we have a strong and growing economy, Mr. Speaker. Several measures to help with affordability in this past budget and several past budgets, Mr. Speaker, will continue to work with individuals who are most vulnerable in our province. Thank you.
Recognize the member from Regina Elphinstone Centre.
Mr. Speaker, it doesn't make any sense to force people living with disabilities to make their future selves poorer just to help this Sask Party government's bottom line today, especially when they're sitting on windfall resource revenues. We're one of the only provinces that does this, Mr. Speaker, hardly a Sask-first policy. It doesn't save the taxpayer any money to force the next generation of seniors to live in grinding poverty. Only this tired and out-of-touch Sask Party government could see this as a sound plan. Again, why is the Sask Party government pushing seniors with disabilities deeper into poverty instead of just letting them collect their full pensions down the line? And can the minister tell us how this is growth that works for everyone?
Recognize the Minister of Social Services.
In this most recent budget, Mr. Speaker, we've been able to increase the entire budget by $46 million. About $26 million of that is directly to income assistance programs, SED, CIS, the personal care home benefit, as well as the seniors income plan. All have seen increases matching or increasing inflation, Mr. Speaker. But in terms of old and tired, Mr. Speaker, I guess they'd have to say that about their predecessors in the NDP, Mr. Speaker. It was Mr. Calvert, our former premier, who said, and I quote, you have to recognize that social assistance and welfare must be funding of last resort, And so we have always considered other sources of income to be income, that welfare payments, social assistance must be the funding of last resort, Mr. Speaker. That is what we inherited from the NDP, Mr. Speaker, and you know, they made that change in 1997, Mr. Speaker, and so that is their legacy, Mr. Speaker.
Hear, hear. I recognize the member from Regina Elphinstone Centre.
Mr. Speaker, the Sask Party government likes to talk about 15 years ago, but today the Children's Advocate released a report finding serious problems with the PSI program, the Person of Sufficient Interest program, entitled "In Their Sufficient Interest?" This is one of the programs that cares for kids in our province when their biological parents can't. The report recommends adding supports for those in PSI care up to age 21. This government is rejecting that change, Mr. Speaker, something the Children's Advocate referred to as deeply disturbing. Why isn't this government taking the Children's Advocate's recommendation? And why isn't that minister making sure that he can say that in this area of child protection, he is doing everything he possibly can? Hear, hear.
Recognize the Minister of Social Services.
Mr. Speaker, we respect and we thank the work of the advocate who does good work, and in my opinion, we have a good relationship between the ministry and the advocate. We've worked previously on previous recommendations, and you'll see some of that in this budget and changes to legislation that are before the House right now, Mr. Speaker. So we've been able to increase the budget for child and family by $16 million this year to a total of $378 million. That's up $290 million. So we've not only listened to the advocate, but we've put funding behind it, Mr. Speaker, and we're willing to work with the advocate on this particular issue the member's talking about today.
Well done. Here, here. Recognize the member from Regina Elphinstone Centre.
Mr. Speaker, we have unconscionable outcomes in this province when it comes to child protection issues. Unconscionable, Mr. Speaker. Here is something tangible that the Children's Advocate has said that this government can do today. We have a bill up in this House for consideration that could make this change. We could do it this month, Mr. Speaker. Again, to the minister, why isn't he doing everything he can? Hear, hear.
Recognize the Minister of Social Services.
Mr. Speaker, this is a serious issue, and of course we all want to have a situation where children are looked after, particularly those in care and those that are placed in, as the member said, with family or extended family, or those that are known to them as directed by the courts, Mr. Speaker. So we're committed to doing a review. That's one of the recommendations, is doing a review of the PSI program. We're committed to doing that, Mr. Speaker, and that will be underway very soon. In this budget, we have several things that the advocate has talked about before, and we brought those forward in terms of 3 group homes for mental for kids that are challenge with mental health, Mr. Speaker. We're doing that with health. We have 6 people that are additional people to be able to do oversight of group homes. We have youth advisory teams that we're funding that we listen to and will be part of this review going forward, Mr. Speaker, as well as 18 caseworkers in this budget, Mr. Speaker.
Hear, hear. Recognize the member from Regina Rosemont.
Mr. Speaker, this tired and out-of-touch government is going after the pensions of seniors with disabilities who need them the most. Just let that sink in, Mr. Speaker. And that's on top of the absolutely zero new cost of living relief measures to help people with the crushing cost of living. People are finding it harder to make ends meet, working so darn hard just to make ends meet. An average family is paying more than $1,000 more in PST than they were before this government brought in the largest tax hike in Saskatchewan's history in 2017. How can that government that's flush with cash defend failing to offer any relief to working people hardest hit by the cost of living pressures?
Hear, hear. Recognize the Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Families and individuals pay almost half of what they paid in income tax when the NDP were in power. Let's just let that sink in, Mr. Speaker. Let that sink in. 112,000 people have been taken off the tax roll entirely, Mr. Speaker. Let's just let that sink in. There was no active child benefit, Mr. Speaker, when the NDP were in power. Let that sink in. There was no graduate retention program for students. Let that sink in. Mr. Speaker, there is a lot. There's over $2 billion of affordability measures in this budget. Personal income tax is indexed in this budget. The seniors' income plan was enhanced in this budget, Mr. Speaker. Let that sink in.
Recognize the member from Regina Rosemont.
The biggest tax hike in Saskatchewan's history, Mr. Speaker, costing people $1,000 more each and every year, Mr. Speaker, and 55% of Saskatchewan people say they're falling behind. Yet a single person in Saskatchewan making $40,000 a year, $20 an hour, Mr. Speaker, is being asked by that government to pay more in taxes and utilities this year, a government that's flush with tax. Mr. Speaker, where is that found? Hidden away in the government's budget document, Mr. Speaker, page 70. And what you'll notice is that the other provinces are stepping up to the plate. We're an outlier. 8 out of 10 provinces are bringing relief, but Saskatchewan and Manitoba are making life more expensive for the very lowest income, those working and making $20 an hour, Mr. Speaker. How can a government that's flush with cash ask the hardest working people in this province to pay more?
Hear, hear, hear. Recognize the Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, I'm very glad the member opposite actually read the budget document, and he knows on page 68 it says, and I quote, overall Saskatchewan is the most affordable jurisdiction in the country for a family of 4 and the second most affordable for a single person with a modest income level, Mr. Speaker. If he turns to page 70 and 71, Mr. Speaker, then it shows that with utilities, taxation and housing costs included, that for a family of 4, Saskatchewan is the most affordable province in our country. That member opposite knows that this is in this document, so I suggest that he just review it a little bit closer, and he will see that in order for it to be the most affordable province in the country, there has to be affordability measures in the budget.
Recognize a member from Saskatoon Fairview.
Mr. Speaker, we're joined again today by medical students who are calling on this government to act and support harm reduction. They're calling on this government to fund intranasal naloxone in the province. Intranasal naloxone works better than other treatments, it's easier to use, and it saves lives. I understand the minister is meeting with students and leaders from Prairie Harm Reduction, Neo-Yotina Friendship Centre, and AIDS Program South Saskatchewan later this afternoon. Will he support their call, fund intranasal naloxone, and finally take meaningful action on the overdose crisis? Yes or no?
Recognize the Minister responsible for mental health and addictions.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I look forward to our meeting this afternoon with the students, Mr. Speaker. In this year's budget, as I've spoken to previously, we're making a record investment into the area of mental health and addictions, including $12.4 million in new investments into new targeted initiatives, such as the addictions treatment spaces expansion, more work to support the Provincial Drug Task Force. Mr. Speaker, when it comes to naloxone and that particular program, we currently have free take-home naloxone kits available in 93 communities across Saskatchewan in 326 locations. Free take-home naloxone kits are now available at more than 117 pharmacies across Saskatchewan. As well, Mr. Speaker, as I've answered this question before, and the member keeps asking the question, we are currently embarking on a pilot project involving nasal naloxone in 18 sites, Mr. Speaker, and we'll be reviewing that data as to any potential for expansion of our naloxone program. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Introduction of bills. Presenting reports by standing and special committees. Orders of the day.
Government orders, adjourn debates. Item number 1. Resume debate on the second reading motion for bill number 128, the Mineral Resources Amendment Act 2023. Ms. Mowat.
I recognize a member from Saskatoon, Meewasin.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It's an honor to be on my feet today to discuss Bill 128, the Mineral Resources Amendment Act 2023. Mr. Speaker, this was a bill that was alluded to in the most recent provincial budget. The bill, in short, looks to amend the 1985 Act by striking out 10% and substituting it with 30%. Mr. Speaker, in the budget it says the Saskatchewan Mineral Exploration Tax Credit has been increased from 10% to 30% to help attract additional mineral exploration investment in Saskatchewan. And Mr. Speaker, we are pleased to see this amendment. It is a good amendment, and it brings us up the highest tax credit in Canada, equal to Manitoba. Mr. Speaker, as we know, critical minerals will be, as they've been named, critical in our future energy transition. And folks around the country will be looking at these minerals as they build batteries for electric cars and batteries for our homes as we transition to a greener economy. So of course we support this tax credit. We have a world-class deposits of critical minerals in Saskatchewan. We have a facility in Saskatoon that was recently visited by the Prime Minister of Canada, and I hope at some point also to be invited to tour that facility, Mr. Speaker. I have to say, though, that in a budget as flush with cash as this was, it was a real shame that this government couldn't find a single dollar to offer tax relief for regular people, Mr. Speaker. We are living through a generational cost of living crisis at this time, as we are well aware, and not a penny was found in this budget to offer relief to folks who are struggling under this government's multiple taxes increases, regressive taxes on everything you can name, and power rate hikes that just keep going up and up, Mr. Speaker. The other shame, Mr. Speaker, is that this Bill 128 represents the 4 lines in this budget that are devoted to the environment. We see a few more lines in here with investments, all very great investments targeted towards mineral exploration, geoscience, very welcome. But Mr. Speaker, we continue to see a government that is falling behind the rest of Canada on a climate file. And Mr. Speaker, when this finance minister was asked about this on the morning radio, she said, well, it's a global issue, it's everywhere, but climate change is only mentioned once in this budget, and it's the effects of the federal government will have on climate change. So, Mr. Speaker, I think that's a shame as well. We know that Saskatchewan has a prominent role, a great story to tell. We have a prominent role, as we do actually have some of the highest GHG emissions among the world per capita. And it's not a surprise that many organizations have been saying this budget just doesn't hit the mark, and environmental groups were one of them, Mr. Speaker. We're seeing continued commentary around not enough, utterly inadequate, deeply disappointing. So, Mr. Speaker, I know that our critic will be engaging with stakeholders. I know that we will have more questions in committee. Again, we are supportive of this tax credit, heeding the call of this industry. So at this time, I will move to adjourn debate on Bill 128.
Member has moved to adjourn debate. As a pleasure assembly to adopt the motion. Carried.
Government orders adjourned debate. Item number 2, resumed debate on the second reading motion for Bill number 129, the Medical Profession Amendment Act 2023. Ms. Mowat.
Recognized member from Regina Elphinstone Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's an honor to be on my feet to provide some comments and debate on Bill number 129, the Medical Profession Amendment Act 2023. Mr. Speaker, this bill was just recently introduced. Would provide for, as the title suggests, some assistance to physicians across the province. My understanding is this is something that is currently done in the States. I think there's maybe not a lot in the States you want to replicate in terms of the healthcare system, Mr. Speaker, but I understand this may be an exception to that. I'm of the view that at first blush, this appears to be something that could assist physicians in some way, Mr. Speaker. We want to take a closer look at it, of course. But I think the disappointment on this side is the fact that while this will improve things slightly, while it's a bit of a Band-Aid that could help, Mr. Speaker, it's certainly not legislation that gets at the root causes of our healthcare system collapse or offers the kind of transformational healthcare change that we need to be seeing right now. We're very disappointed, for example, on this side, Mr. Speaker, to see that this budget barely kept up with inflation. I don't think it did in some areas. And when we're seeing the kind of strain and closure and disruption that we're seeing currently in Saskatchewan, this certainly is not going to go far enough in addressing those issues. What we really need to be seeing, Mr. Speaker, is some considerable investments in primary health care. We need accessible, integrated, continuous health care for the people of Saskatchewan, and of course physicians have a role to play that, but this isn't what we had in mind when we talk about team-based care, Mr. Speaker. We see teams as providing integrated care to individuals, whether they need urgent or non-urgent care. We see these teams as offering folks a continuity of care, whether it's hospitalization or specialty services or other medical services they need. These teams would function, almost serve a triage approach, which would take strain off of our overcrowded ERs, Mr. Speaker. They'd also provide a higher quality of care for Saskatchewan people. A team that knows their family's history, that understands their context, that is able to broker relationships with other providers in the healthcare system. These are really important. This is a really important issue that we need to be seeing more investments in, Mr. Speaker, in primary care. And of course, this budget on that was a missed opportunity, and you don't need to take it from me. I believe the president of Saskatchewan Medical Association is of a similar view, Mr. Speaker. I look forward. I know that our health critic, the member for Saskatoon Fairview, has already begun to reach out to stakeholders to make sure that we get this piece of legislation right. It's obviously not a solution to our nursing shortage, Mr. Speaker, and we're very disappointed to see by the fact that this legislation isn't coming with a concerted effort to take the nurses up on their offer, to really put together a group of people that can look at this issue and find solutions to the nursing catastrophe that nurses are crying out for action on from this government, Mr. Speaker. This certainly isn't a solution to the lack of physicians, particularly in family physicians, Mr. Speaker. We're seeing a very concerning shortage there. This is really devastating for families across the province. So, to sum up, Mr. Speaker, not necessarily a misstep here, but certainly we need to be seeing more from this government in terms of addressing these issues in healthcare. What many have remarked is basically healthcare collapse that we're seeing. You know, and it's true that a lot of provinces are dealing with challenges in healthcare, but unfortunately we're not seeing this government step up with the kinds of investments we need to make sure that we are recruiting and retaining the healthcare professionals that we have, to ensure that folks don't have to wait, as we've seen this week, that when they call for an ambulance, that they can rely on that service. They're not left waiting. Mr. Speaker, I mean, imagine that is absolutely terrifying, especially in more rural and remote communities, to be put in that position, so that we're not expecting seniors to wait 10, 20 hours in the emergency room. This should not be happening in a developed province like Saskatchewan, a province that is rich in resources, a province that is sitting on windfall revenues. This simply should not be something that we're asking of the people of Saskatchewan. So sure, a step like this is welcome. Of course, the critic in health is going to take a closer look at it and reach out to stakeholders, but we need to be seeing much more coming from that government in terms of addressing the healthcare crisis that we're experiencing in this province. So with that, I would move to adjourn debate on Bill number 129, the Medical Profession Amendment Act 2023.
The member has moved to adjourn debate. It's a pleasure assembly to adopt the motion. Carried.
Government orders adjourn debates. Item number 3, resume debate on the second reading motion for Bill number 130, the Lotteries and Gaming Saskatchewan Corporation Act. Ms. Mullet.
Recognize the member from Saskatoon, Utana.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a pleasure to be on my feet today on Bill number 130, the Lotteries and Gaming Saskatchewan Corporation Act. It's my understanding that with this bill, there will be the creation of a new Crown corporation, the Lotteries and Gaming Saskatchewan Corporation, responsible for the management and operation of gaming and lotteries. SAS Gaming will now be a subsidiary of this corporation, and it will continue the FNMI gaming agreements. So, of course, we are always supportive of initiatives to modernize or find opportunities for modernization, and particularly in the area of legal online gaming. We would have preferred a SAS-made, ready company to deliver this service, but as I look at this bill and the comments from the minister introducing the bill, I guess what stands out for me in particular are issues around, first of all, he makes reference to the separation between the policy and management of this sector, of lotteries and gaming, versus the regulation, which will remain under the provision of, I believe it's the SLGA. So I would note, first of all, that I'm supportive of these measures when we ensure that we're not putting the government in a conflict of interest where it's both, on the one hand, operating and managing sectors and then our activities, and then at the same time regulating them. I think that's when we have issues arise. And certainly within my critic area, there's been a number of concerns brought to my attention, particularly when it comes to the Diefenbaker irrigation expansion project, which has the Water Security Agency as both proponent and regulator of water in this province. So certainly I see a very disturbing conflict of interest there. So, happy to see within this bill that separation between those activities and responsibilities, and implore the government to do the same in all areas. I guess the other thing that comes to mind as I look at this bill is that it's certainly a lucrative industry with potential for revenue generation from sports betting, online betting, and I think the jury's out right now in terms of sort of where we'll land in terms of an overall net benefit. We saw the loss of revenues from the sale of liquor and the loss of good mortgage-paying unionized jobs with the sale of the liquor stores by this government and the recent lotteries that happened in that sector very recently. And so I think it's always a trade-off here in terms of both benefiting from a sector and that is regulated, and certainly that's a good thing because as we've seen in other areas where we have unregulated industries that are being managed and taken over or operated by criminal elements, that the harms are evident and go unchecked. And there I will take sort of a bit of a jumping off point, because in the past, sports and betting would have been seen as a bit of a one of these morally laden kinds of activities with stigma attached, a lot of concern from various groups about harms, and certainly I am supportive of bringing things out into the open, into regulated forms, so that these things can happen in an open and transparent way, so that we ensure that it is not suspect or prone to sort of criminal undertakings and the harms that result to people who are then exploited in the process. And again, I would just say that it's curious to me that we can have, on the one hand, sectors like this one, in terms of lotteries and gaming, where we look at the upside, and indeed there is upside. People do get a lot of enjoyment and sort of benefit from participating in this kind of betting, and have a little bit of fun, and it's all fun and good. No one gets hurt, but we know that there is a spectrum of use in these kinds of sectors, whether we're talking about gaming and sports betting online, within casinos, what have you. but in other areas too, you know, where say, for instance, when it comes to substance use, and certainly we see how alcohol and now more recently cannabis are legalized and regulated. We saw what happened during the years and age of prohibition when you know, that was, you know, alcohol was an underground economy. You had people becoming blind from you know, consuming alcohol of a high alcoholic content, so on and so forth, right? So, in fact, allowing for the regulation of liquor sales was a form of harm reduction, okay? And I would submit that in this similar way, you know, not having sort of, you know, illegal houses of gaming and having this kind of practice be in the regulated sphere is also a form of harm reduction. And I would say that there are other areas laden with moral stigma that we need to move forward on and ensure that they too are brought into the public realm and regulated as a means of harm reduction, because we know that people are dying from overdoses related to toxic drug supply. And there is evidence that points towards regulating in the same way that this bill will regulate to ensure harm reduction. Because I think we can see that there is a spectrum here of where you have some use or activity where it can be beneficial, and then move into more sort of non-problematic casual use, and then further on into more problematic and then chronic dependence. And you know, I think we all know individuals that we've encountered through our lives that have become susceptible to you know, addictions to gambling. And certainly we do want to see that there are you know, continue to be programs and supports available to deal with chronic kinds of misuse by certain individuals, and that's why it's important that we regulate. And I know that the critic for this area, when they have a chance to go to committee on this bill, will be certainly looking to understand that that this bill will get it right in terms of ensuring that we have the right balance here to ensure that as this industry continues to expand and be regulated, you know, we've seen more online gaming and sports betting occurring, that you know, that it continues to follow that harm reduction approach that is so necessary when we are dealing with issues that exist on a spectrum, where there is a potential for stigma around, you know, problematic betting and people who become addicted and, you know, lose the farm, literally, to, you know, problematic betting. And I implore this government to consider that in all areas of activity where Saskatchewan people are at risk of moving through that spectrum of use that I've talked about to where it becomes problematic and chronic. And it's why I do want to continue to take this opportunity to make that comparison to other areas of regulation. We've seen in British Columbia where they have decriminalized small amounts of substances, because that allows for individuals who are suffering from chronic dependence to be open and available to receive help and support. It's time for us to drop the stigma. It's time for us to be open and accepting to the fact that people going to drink and people going to use and people going to gamble. And we need to have a framework, a regulatory framework that supports people and helps them to keep that use safe, and one that doesn't ruin families, doesn't lead to chronic use and death. That's, there are areas where, these kinds of uses are leading to fatalities. And I think if you can think about gaming, online gaming and sports betting, and compare that to other, personal choices and freedoms around use in other areas, and understand these in the similar context of harm reduction, you will see the merits of why it's necessary to legalize and ensure that we are addressing a toxic drug supply here in Saskatchewan that remains unregulated and within the criminal domain, where it's, the formulation is contaminated and leading to deaths. And the budget that this government brought forward is focused solely on one end of the problem. We would like to see more upfront measures. That is what the subject of the discussions are this afternoon by the members and students from the university who are asking for greater harm reduction approaches. And it's important that we take this approach in all these areas. So for lotteries and gaming, thank you very much for reminding me that that is the bill that we are speaking on here today. With that, I will conclude my remarks and adjourn debate.
The member has moved to adjourn debate. It is a pleasure of Assembly to adopt the motion. Carried.
Government orders adjourn debates. Item number 4, resume debate on the second reading motion for Bill number 131, the Lotteries and Gaming Saskatchewan Corporation Consequential Amendments Act 2023. Ms. Mowat.
Recognize the member from Saskatoon-Utana.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a pleasure to be on my feet again for Bill number 131, consequential amendments to the Lotteries and Gaming Saskatchewan Corporation Act. I think that my remarks on the previous bill canvassed my thoughts on this issue rather exhaustively, and I'm sure that the members opposite appreciated hearing those remarks and understood the comparison that I was drawing. And I know that the critic will have more to say on this bill when it goes to committee, and in the interest of moving that forward, I'll conclude my remarks and adjourn debate on Bill number 131.
Members move to adjourn debate. It's a pleasure of Assembly to adopt the motion. Carried.
Government orders adjourn debates. Item number 5, resume debate on the second reading motion for Bill number 132, the Boiler and Pressure Vessel Automation and Remote Supervision Pilot Amendment Act 2023. Ms. Mowat.
Recognize the member from Saskatoon University.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's good to enter into adjourned debate briefly on behalf of the opposition with respect to Bill 132, the Boiler and Pressure Vessel Automation and Remote Supervision Pilot Amendment Act 2023. Mr. Speaker, with this bill, it's being brought forward, the amendments to allow the Chief Boiler Inspector in Saskatchewan to exempt boiler owners from having a licensed power engineer on site at all times that a boiler is in operation. The owner still would be required to have a licensed power engineer who would take responsibility for the operation of the boiler, and the chief boiler inspector may provide this exemption in limited circumstances, which namely are where the owner of a boiler has established a system of automation and remote supervision that meets acceptable safety standards, where the owner of a boiler has agreed to comply with any conditions the chief boiler inspector requires, and then also where the chief boiler inspector believes there is not an undue risk to public safety. We do have a few questions initially around this bill, Mr. Speaker. One being noted, kind of read through the minister's remark, but did not see if this was based on recommendations that were made from TSASC, the Technical Safety Authority of Saskatchewan. And Mr. Speaker, of course, we know that they are responsible in our province for overseeing regulations of boilers and pressure vessels. And so we'd like to know if they were consulted, if these recommendations came from them, or if they came solely from industry. And the reason being, Mr. Speaker, as goes without saying, that we need to focus very much on safety here. We need to make sure that those issues are being addressed, and also make sure that we're looking at the impacts of automation in our society. We'll see automation more and more, no doubt, and make sure that the workers of our province are not left behind with advances in technology, especially around automation. So, I mean, workers also need to benefit and reap the benefits of increasing automation, not just industry players. So I think good to note too, Mr. Speaker, that here in Saskatchewan, we need to be aware that we have the highest numbers of workplace fatalities in Canada. And so loosening restrictions, you have to be very concerned where that happens, that safety is paramount. So again, we're concerned here with, it's a very good paying quality job that's going to be cut. We don't know the implications for the number of workers who will be impacted by this bill if passed, but that is a consideration as well. And so I know that my colleague, she will be, or critic for this bill, she will be consulting widely with stakeholders to make sure that these recommended changes are suitable in the ways that I've mentioned here. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I will adjourn debate on, I move that we adjourn debate on Bill 132. Thank you.
The member has moved to adjourn debate. It is a pleasure of the Assembly to adopt the motion. Carried. I recognize the Government House Leader.
In order to facilitate the work of committee both this afternoon and this evening, I move that this House do now adjourn.
Here, here.
Government House Leaders move to adjourn the House. It is a pleasure of the Assembly to adopt the motion. This House now stands adjourned till 1:30 tomorrow.